Hello, this is Aaron Wissner. It is Monday, the 10th. No, it's October the 5th, 2020. And we are here live on the line with Nicole Foss from New Zealand. For you, it is Tuesday. And we're going to talk a little bit about the U.S. presidential election, especially given that this past weekend, the president of the U.S., Donald Trump, he was in the hospital due to what appeared to be COVID disease. Yes, coronavirus disease. And so, Nicole, what is your take on everything that's going on in the U.S. politics right now?
Well, there's a lot of disinformation coming out. So people are, be prepared to have all kinds of conflicting information thrown at you about the president's health and about everybody else's health in the administration as well, because now is not the time they're likely to start telling the truth. And it's definitely part of the authoritarian mindset to make it sound like the leader is absolutely invincible. So expect to hear that Trump is Superman and he's doing fabulously well, better than anyone else ever has with COVID or something like that. But it isn't true. And it's also not true that he got it recently. You don't become symptomatic with this for probably something of the order of 10 days. So he has had this for a while. This is not new. He would have been positive during the debate. This could be a problem for a whole lot of other people too. They were 12 feet apart, I believe, Trump and Biden at the debate, but an hour and a half of yelling, that does not put Biden in the clear. He's negative at the moment, but it takes a while to incubate. So this could be a bigger problem than it currently is. So people were originally talking about a super spreader event when Trump introduced Amy Coney Barrett at the White House, but it's quite likely that he had it before then. The timeline doesn't really fit for him to have picked it up then. It isn't just him who has it. There are now at least a dozen cases. There's certainly Trump and his wife. There's Hope Hicks, his one of his advisors, the fellow who fetches and carries for him all the time at the White House. Nick Luna has it as well. At least 3 senators, possibly Bill Barr, although he hasn't admitted it. He originally said he wasn't going to quarantine, and now he is, which makes me think he probably had a positive test. In the meantime, he's just not going to tell you about it. But there are quite a few people who have tested positive. So far, not the vice president. But Trump was taken to Walter Reed on Friday. He had been given supplemental oxygen. That already means that this is at least a moderate case. This is not a mild case of COVID. It's at least moderate, or he would not have needed supplemental oxygen. The drug that they put him on, dexamethasone, they put him on when he went to Walter Reed. That is a drug that is only given in severe COVID cases, and it makes you feel like you're on top of the world. So you may have noticed his tweets. This is dexamethasone psychosis. When you are taking that, it's mood swings. You can be absolutely manic. You can be all over the map emotionally. But what you are not is fit to run anything whatsoever. And the problem is, Trump is never going to voluntarily hand over power, even when incapacitated. Mike Pence will never request that power be handed to him under any circumstances. So what you have is someone who is still in charge, who's now insisting on letting himself out of the hospital, who still thinks he's fit to do the job, and who is absolutely 100% unfit to do this job. He's not fit to do anything at this point. And if you have a severe case of COVID, whatever you may feel like on dexamethasone temporarily, it doesn't go away that quickly. It will be weeks at least, unless he actually dies of it before then. But if he's going to recover, it will be weeks. It will be after the election before he's feeling remotely normal again. And who knows? I mean, he could become a long hauler and then not feel normal again ever. But we don't know that. At the moment, what we do know is it's a more severe case than they are letting on. It could be quite severe. So he's having a temporary feeling of being quite healthy because he's taken this very, very powerful steroid. He defied his doctor's orders to go for a joyride. Now, the car that he goes for joyrides in is not only bulletproof, it's also hermetically sealed. So he was in there with only a cloth mask with Secret Service personnel who he was contaminating. They will now have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So they were not appreciating that a lot. The doctors at Walter Reed didn't appreciate it either. Some of them have been expressing their frustration publicly. I imagine a lot more of that is going to happen over the next while. So they don't want him to go back to the White House. He's insisting on going back to the White House. Now, the White House is equipped with a full medical suite, so it's not the end of the world for him to be there instead of Walter Reed. But realistically, he should be remaining at Walter Reed. It's just that he's far too stubborn to do that. So he's already claiming that all the ballots are going to be fraudulent, that he's going to throw it all up to the Supreme Court, that all the things that he was claiming before, he's now claiming all over again. So he's just saying nothing has happened. It's all fine. I'm over it. And if you look at Fox News is now saying, well, Joe Biden hasn't had COVID. So Trump is obviously the best person to lead us through this because he has personal experience. Just they spin this in whatever way they possibly can. It's ridiculous, but this is what they're currently doing, saying that Trump has beaten it. He's tough. It's like when they say that Kim Jong-un gets a hole-in-one every hole for an 18-hole course. This is the kind of authoritarian propaganda that is put out by regimes like this. It's ridiculously overblown. Do not believe any of it. It's quite possible that he's not going to recover. I don't reckon his chances are all that great. For his age, if you were looking at just 74-year-old overweight man, his chances would still be reasonable. But if he's already having a moderate to severe case, then his odds will be lower than that. So can't tell you whether he's going to live or die. No one knows. But he is very ill and extremely unfit to be carrying out the duties of his office. They should absolutely be invoking the 25th Amendment, but they won't, because that would require Mike Pence to initiate it. And Mike Pence will not do that. He knows perfectly well that Trump would see that as a power grab, and he would be permanently out of Trump's favor if Trump recovers. That would be it for his career. So Pence will never do that. So
wouldn't that also impact the election if Pence was to try to do that? Because then it would appear that, oh, maybe we shouldn't re-elect Trump because, you know, if he's not fit enough to be president right now, will he ever be fit enough? So that would impact.
It's a huge question mark. Exactly. And we don't know. At this point, Trump's name will be on the ballot, even if he's dead by the election. So then the Republicans will just decide, if they were to win, they would then just decide who they want to put on the ballot instead of him. And it would probably be Pence. And then Pence would pick a VP. So that would be the most likely way if the Republicans win. I think personally, the only way they're going to win is with massive cheating at this point. The polls are...
Sounds like Biden was up by about 10 points right now.
Yes, he's up by a lot more than Clinton was at this time. And he doesn't have some of the same baggage that she had. He has different baggage, of course. But I think he would win. In fact, I think he will probably win in a landslide unless there is cheating. And of course, there will be cheating. There will also be voter suppression. There are court cases going on all over the country that the administration is taking out to try and challenge ballots. In little local elections all over the place, they are engaging in massive voter suppression. So that is ongoing already. You don't need Trump to be healthy for that to happen. That's all happening because of the people who are enabling him. So it's not just Trump who does it by himself.
As far as Donald's health, who is the prime minister in the UK? Was it Jeremy
Johnson?
Coburn?
Boris Johnson. He had it, and he ended up in intensive care.
And he decided that he wanted to finish up his prime minister role, right? Kind of because of the ongoing complications. And that's kind of what led to him wanting to finish up the Brexit. Oh,
he definitely wants to push Brexit through. He does seem to have recovered. So he doesn't look to be a COVID long hauler. Like he doesn't look like he's ill when he's wandering around. He may have something going on internally that we wouldn't know about, but as far as we know, Boris Johnson is a recovered COVID case. But he did have to go into the intensive care unit. So he did have a pretty nasty case of it as well. He's younger than Trump and not quite as overweight, but still, they have comparable risk factors, I would say. So there's no guarantee that Trump will either recover or die from this. It could go either way, but it is more severe than people are suggesting. And it is infecting a lot of the administration at this point. And it may well affect a lot more because these people have been wandering around without masks, without any kind of distancing. So this may just be the first few. I think it's of the order of 20 people so far, I think. Might be not quite that many, but this could just increase exponentially because it was a super spreader event, basically. And
now the news was mentioning that he had a positive test result. I don't know what day that was taken, but apparently it was unclear when his previous negative test result was. So, or even whether say that again?
They're refusing to say.
So maybe it might have been weeks ago.
It could have been. If I had to guess, knowing what I know about Donald Trump's psychology, I would say he probably never gets tested because it's unpleasant. He probably gets everyone else around him tested and then says, okay, as long as you're okay, I'm okay. And I don't have to be tested because I'm the president. That would be my guess as to how he would play it out. So, of course, there may not be test results that could be given out. I would imagine he wouldn't have had a test until he was symptomatic. And I think he was symptomatic before Hope Hicks. The media is trying to say that Hope Hicks gave this to Trump. I don't believe that. I think he gave it to her, although it's impossible to exactly work it all out because there's so many people who have it. But he was symptomatic that day. And he went to do a fundraiser in Bedminster when he knew he was symptomatic. They're denying this, of course, but he knew he was symptomatic at that point. So he's exposed a whole lot more people. There are thousands of people who will have been exposed because of this. And not just the people working in the administration or in the White House, but the families of the people working in the administration and in the White House. For instance, Kellyanne Conway has it. And we only know Kellyanne Conway has it because her daughter said so on TikTok. And now her daughter has it too, and it's just spreading all over the place. So this is going to be a major problem. When you have that kind of super spreader event and a whole lot of people get sick all at once, it does spread exponentially, and it could wipe out a large percentage of the government. Not as in kill them, but put them out of action for a while so that the US doesn't really have a government.
What would this mean for congressional action and especially the Senate action on the replacing the Supreme Court vacancy?
Well, there are 3 senators who have COVID. They're all Republicans. And there's a Senate special election. Mark Kelly, if he beats Martha McSally in Arizona, will end up being seated before the election because it's a special election. That's not part of the general. So it could be changing the calculus in the Senate. We don't know yet to what extent, but it could. So Mitch McConnell is absolutely determined to push through the nomination anyway. He may well succeed in doing that, but it will depend how many people are ill and whether they're allowed to come and vote even when they're sick. McConnell will probably say, sure, you can come into the Senate with COVID. So he might make them wear a mask, but I think this is going to be a problem anyway. I think trying to hold votes in person when certain people have a serious illness is going to be problematic. So I don't know how that's going to go either, but it is most definitely a complication. And this could affect the House as well. Trump is expecting to win this election in the House of Representatives. So I think it's the 12th Amendment. So the 12th Amendment says if nobody gets to 270 in the Electoral College, then it goes to the House and each state delegation gets 1 vote, and there are more Republican state delegations. So under that, he would win under the 12th Amendment. It would then go to SCOTUS. He's packed SCOTUS, so he would expect to win there too. He may or may not win at SCOTUS, but he would certainly expect to. But this is not going to be an election like you've ever had before. It's going to be just a complete and utter mess from beginning to end. There's going to be legal action all over the place. There's going to be violence no matter who wins. Because Trump the other day at the debate told the Proud Boys to stand by. They knew exactly what that meant. They had it on t-shirts within 24 hours, which means it was probably planned in advance that he was going to say that. But he has his shock troops standing by, and whoever wins the election, there is going to be violence. If Trump actually dies, they're going to make a martyr of him. They're going to turn him into some kind of Christ-like figure, which is just appalling when you think about it, because there isn't anyone further from being Christ-like than Donald Trump. But this is exactly where this is going to go. They've already got the proto-religion. The QAnon is becoming a proto-religion, and now they're going to have their martyred leader. And I just think, just to think that this could play out this way. I really hope it doesn't. But this is what I would expect if Trump actually does die. I think by far the best scenario would be for him to survive, lose the election, and go to jail, because I think he really needs to face justice, and he shouldn't be martyred. People should find out what's actually been going on. Once someone's been martyred, then you never ever hear about what they actually did in life anymore, because they're no longer a human being, they're a symbol. And so they're washed clean of all the sins of whatever they did in their lives, as far as their followers are concerned. So if the followers don't find out what he's been up to before he ends up dying, then they probably never will. And that would be a shame. I think the whole story needs to come out, because I think this is an episode that America absolutely needs to learn from in a very big way. And if the information doesn't come out, then the right lessons won't be learned. I think there is so much that people need to wrap their heads around. How on earth did the country get into this position? What can we do about it? You know, there's an awful lot of thinking that people are going to need to do. And I think for that, they need the information.
This reminds me of John Oliver. He's a commentator who does a program on HBO. And I think it was the last week in September. So last week, he had kind of a 15 or 20 minute look at the US election system and the Electoral College. And he was talking about how, you know, here's all these issues with the election and the Electoral College. And then there's some states who are talking about, you know, what we should really do is whoever wins the popular vote, we should give them the electors for our state, whether or not the majority in our state went for any particular candidate. Because the whole idea, you know, he was saying it's only twice that it's happened that the popular vote getter did not end up being president. So, but both of those times were within my lifetime. And that this would be the third time if Trump were still in office in February.
One thing that could happen that just that occurred to me is McConnell has declared a recess in the Senate. When the Senate goes on recess, the president can directly appoint a Supreme Court justice as a temp. They're temporary, but he could, during this recess, he could simply install Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court with no confirmation hearings whatsoever during a Senate recess. So that would be an interesting possibility too.
And then how long would she be seated?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we start to get into really esoteric election law in a country I've never lived in. So that I would have to go and look up. So it starts to get really devil in the details type stuff. But so I'm not entirely sure how long she would be on the bench if he did that. But he may only care if she's on the bench long enough to hand him the election. So maybe it doesn't even matter. So there are just so many complications that are going to come out of this. And you're right that the the states don't have to go with the popular vote. They don't have to. They usually do. They nominate electors based on who has won the popular vote in their state, but they don't have to do that. And Pennsylvania has already been talking about completely disregarding the results of the election and nominating a set of Trump electors anyway. And other Republican states could do that too. So this is another real devil in the detail, that electors do not have to represent the results of the election, because the US is actually not a democracy. It's a republic and a democracy are not the same thing. So there are all sorts of anti-democratic aspects in the Constitution, and that was very much by design. They did not want one man, one vote. They called that the tyranny of the majority. The founding fathers called that the tyranny of the majority. I forget which one of them, because again, this isn't something that we study in school in Canada, but again, I could go find it. But
I was wondering, did you have a chance, the debate between Donald and Joe, I think was between our last time we talked and this time.
I did watch it.
Did you watch that at all?
I
And if
watched
so,
the whole thing. I was appalled. It wasn't a debate. It was Trump behaving, well, I mean, you're a middle school teacher, so I don't mean to be insulting, but like a middle school kid, you know, like the kids who would have been in your class, the kind of behavior that you might see. I mean, I was almost expecting him to start throwing spitballs. You know, he does not know how to behave at all.
I have to say that the middle school kids I had behaved much better than that.
Which is wonderful. I used to teach middle school too, and some of the ones I taught did not behave better than that. So I'm drawing on my own experience, but you are probably a better middle school teacher than I was, because I only did it for 1 year, and it was something I sort of got roped into, and I never went and did any teaching qualifications. They just asked me to teach for a year, and so I did, and I live to regret it rather a lot. It was not very much fun, but Trump does behave like an adolescent, a really badly behaved adolescent. And he's been like that his entire life. He used to throw rocks at the neighbor's baby in his pram. He beat up his teachers. He got sent to military school because he was a delinquent. And his father actually encouraged every aspect of his sociopathy all the way through his adolescence. So he became a fully fledged sociopath, just like his father. And
I was going to ask you.
They do. Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw that there was another Trump book that came out. So Abrams or something, he already had a couple of those.
Jeff Abramson.
And then Mary Trump came out with one. But then, is it Woodward? Bob Woodward or something came out with one?
Bob Woodward wrote Rage.
What's the gist of this book? Does it add anything to the narrative, to the understanding?
Yes. So Woodward's book, which is called Rage, Trump actually sat for interviews with Bob Woodward. And what came out of that is that Trump knew in early February that COVID was a dangerous disease. And then he went out and told the whole country it was a hoax and downplayed it consistently ever since. But he told Bob Woodward what he was being told. And so thanks to Bob Woodward, we know what Trump knew and when he knew it. And we know he was lying to the country about COVID. So if you watch Glenn Kirshner, who's one of the people on my Twitter list, he's a 30-year veteran federal prosecutor. He reckons he could put Trump away for second-degree murder for that. And I agree with him. At the very least, it would be culpable homicide, like hundreds of thousands of counts of culpable homicide. So we're talking massive legal liability. If Trump loses this election, unless he's somehow pardoned, he's facing hundreds, if not thousands, of felonies. So he would spend the rest of his life in jail if there's any justice in the world. Now, there probably isn't, so I think that probably won't happen. But if there was any justice, that is what would happen.
If he was to resign before Joe was to take office, then Pence could pardon him.
Could pardon him, yes. Pence could pardon him, but only for federal crimes. He's also facing a whole lot of legal liability at the state level. Pence can't do anything about that. Cuomo could pardon him, but do you think he will? No. Absolutely not. So
Now, something in New York about some schools even being closed, be in certain areas where COVID is on the uptick.
yeah, yeah, they're being pretty careful in New York. They don't want a second wave to come flooding through. But it's very difficult because people don't have a lot of patience for something like this that goes on for half of forever, which is what this seems like it's gone on for. In New Zealand, we were locked down for about 5 weeks. And then we had a couple of weeks of sort of semi-lockdown, but life is totally normal now. I can only imagine what it must feel like for people who've been locked down since March, not able to go to work, maybe stuck in a one-bedroom apartment with a couple of toddlers or something like that. I can't imagine what that must be like. People are definitely going to have a limited tolerance for that. So eventually everything will open up again, even if it isn't safe, which is what's happening. But then you're just getting spread again. So the United States is now going for herd immunity, that they're just going to say, let it rip. There's nothing we can do about it. I mean, in some states, they will try and do certain things, but there won't be any effective means of containment, because the effective means of containment are things like lockdown and closing schools, and people have just had enough of that. So I think it's going to be, oh, well, some people are going to die. That seems to be the strategy, because at this point, the only way to prevent that would be to lock down the entire country all at once for probably 6 weeks. And I don't think Americans would put up with that at all.
Well, and that was suggested way back in March and April. I mean, I remember Steve Keen suggesting that, just lock everybody like almost 100% down for 6 weeks or something.
Yeah, that's all you have to do. For 6 weeks is all you have to do if you do it properly. If you do it all at once, no movement around, then you get the numbers down so low that then you can contact trace. The few cases you still have, you can find them easily, you can trace, you can prevent in quarantine, so you're preventing further spread, but you can't control it if you've got massive spread and you have no idea where it even is. So I think it's too late now. The US will be going for herd immunity. And I just hope that,
and I think it would probably
bad as I think. The death rate is falling.
It'd have to be
right. So
I think it would have to be a global thing if there was a 6 weeks.
Well, you wouldn't have to if you closed the borders. If you didn't let anyone in and out of your country and you just locked it down for 6 weeks, you could control it within your country, but you'd have to keep the borders locked down. And in the US, the borders are locked down anyway, all from the outside. So that wouldn't even be an issue. You can't really go anywhere from America right now. The borders are closed by other people. The treatments are a lot better. So even although the US is going for herd immunity, it's not going to look like New York looked in March, because we know a lot more about how to treat this condition now. It was originally thought of as really a purely respiratory condition, and people were put on ventilators quite early. Now we know that it's more likely to do with the circulatory system. And the respiratory effects are kind of a side effect. So there's a very complicated system called a bradykinin storm that I'm not even going to attempt to explain the biochemistry of, but we understand the system so much better now that we know what kind of things to give people. We know what to give them as prophylactics. So vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, things like that. If you have a good quantity of those in your bloodstream, and you're healthy and you don't have chronic inflammation going on, then you're in the best possible position to not get the disease. You might be exposed to the virus, but you're not likely to get the disease if you have the right levels of all of those things. And then if you do get the disease, we know a lot more now about how to treat it. So we know about steroids like dexamethasone. We know about ivermectin that Chris Martenson has been talking about, and the controversial one, hydroxychloroquine, which does actually work if you give it early and if you give it with zinc. But the way the trials were done that demonized it, they gave it at toxic doses. So they gave it at ridiculously high doses, that the trials were set up to fail. So proper trials with hydroxychloroquine show that it does work If you give it very early, like as soon as you notice you have symptoms, you'd want to take it right then, because it's an antiviral. It acts to stop the virus taking hold. If the virus has already taken hold, then there's nothing that hydroxychloroquine can do for you. So if you give it late, it doesn't do anything. If you give it early, its role is to get the zinc into the cell. If you get the zinc into the cell where it has its biological effect, then that is protective against COVID. So this is something that people would want to consider. There are lots of protocols for this. Chris Martinson's gone through all of them in enormous detail. So I really recommend to people to listen to his videos on COVID if they possibly can. He's been on top of this from the very, very beginning, and he's gone through all the data. He's absolutely brilliant at this. So people aren't going to die in droves in the way that they did originally. Some people still will die of this, though. It is still a dangerous disease. It's still about 10 times as dangerous as the flu. So you really don't want to get it. People who do get it and who end up with symptoms, I mean, you're talking weeks and weeks. It's not the flu where in the flu, you're probably sick as a dog for 3 days and then a little wobbly for a couple of days and then you're probably okay. This is not like that. This can lay you down for weeks, and it comes and it goes and you think you're better and then you're flat on your back again. And symptoms can go on, they can go on for months. There are people who have never recovered from COVID. So we still have to really be very careful with it. And I think now that the death rate is coming down, the biggest concern to me is the chronic morbidity. The fact that you could have an absolute epidemic of chronic fatigue syndrome, autoimmune conditions, all sorts of things where people are really no longer able to function. They can't work. People who are COVID long haulers would really struggle to be able to hold down any kind of job. Plus, that's a pre-existing condition, and the Affordable Care Act is about to die, because whether or not Amy Coney Barrett ends up on the Supreme Court, the Affordable Care Act will fall when it comes before Supreme Court. Because even if Roberts votes with the Liberals, it's a 4-4 tie. And if it's a tie, the lower court ruling stands, which means that the Affordable Care Act is dead. And how many people are going to have pre-existing conditions now? Because COVID is a pre-existing condition. If you have had COVID, you are no longer eligible for the Army, for instance. So they take it very, very seriously. This could leave a whole lot of people really chronically ill, needing a whole lot of support at a time when support isn't really going to be available, because we're going to be moving into hard times financially. So it's going to be a lot less money going around. And it's just a perfect storm, really, that people are getting hit with this at the very time when their ability to deal with it is going to be reduced. And this is profoundly sad. And this is why I think this herd immunity strategy is a terrible idea. Because if there had been a proper way of dealing with this, like what we did, that gives you time to find all the good treatments. So then you don't have to have a massive wave of deaths, and you might be able to prevent the wave of chronic illness as well. Because if you can get people into the state where they're less likely to get it in the first place, you're not going to get that same problem. So people who really lock down early while we figured everything out with this condition may never have these huge death spikes. Unfortunately, the places that went for herd immunity didn't have that option. I mean, everyone caught it at the beginning. Well, they're still catching it, but a whole lot of people caught it at the beginning when the disease was not well understood, and they were given treatments that it turned out were not best practice. I mean, the doctors didn't know. They were figuring it out as they went along. So it's not their fault that they didn't know what they were facing. But nevertheless, a lot of people died who wouldn't have died if they had got it later, because they would have had better treatments. It really is.
So one would like to imagine that Trump got the best possible care as quickly as humanly possible. But
he also
that's
got a
not the
very
case.
experimental treatment. He got a monoclonal antibody treatment that hasn't even been approved, even for compassionate use. So this tells me those doctors were really desperate. So he must have been very sick for them to give him a totally unapproved, untested treatment. they must have been thinking, oh my God, we have the president and he's about to die. I would imagine that was their thought. You know, they might have been more aggressive in treating him than they would have been in treating someone else, I would guess. But still, you wouldn't give the president an untested treatment unless you really felt that you had no other choice. So I think he's much sicker than people think. And he's probably going to be up and down all over the place over the next while. So don't expect any sense to come out of his mouth, even to the extent that came out of it before. Even the level of sense he was previously capable of, which was not much, don't expect that level of sense to come out of his mouth when he's on these drugs.
Now, doesn't he have 2 debates still scheduled, though?
Yes, and he's almost certainly not going to be able to do them. Because if he's this sick, there's no way he's going to be better by the time for the next debate. It's less than 2 weeks, I think, the next debate. It's supposed to be a town hall, so it would be a bit different. But I mean, who in the public is going to attend a town hall with someone breathing COVID all over them? I don't think so. So I think the debates will be canceled.
Apparently the Donald supporters.
Some of them are prepared to do that, but not all of them. The kind of people who end up at town halls are usually more people with questions. They try and pick undecided voters, people who actually have a genuine question to ask, rather than just people who are going to say, so Donald, how does it feel to be as wonderful as you are? That's the sort of question that you get from One American News Network. He always ends his news conferences with them so that he could go out on a high note, because they give him these ridiculous softball questions. But I don't think there's going to be softball questions at a town hall style debate. I think it would be holding the candidates' feet to the fire, but I don't think Trump will be able to be at it anyway, or the next one. So I don't think those debates will happen.
So the only debate will be the one where they are talking over each other, and especially Donald is talking over everything Joe seems to be trying to say.
Yeah, and Joe Biden didn't even hardly get a word in edgewise. It was really sad. He was put on the back foot a lot, and one of the tactics Trump was using was this rapid fire interruption. That's the sort of thing that if you are a stutterer, it blows your concentration totally. And he was trying to make Joe stutter all over the place. And Joe managed to hold it together, but when you're trying to put a lot of energy into not stuttering, it makes it harder to get your points out coherently and clearly. I think he did his best, but it really wasn't a good performance. But it's not his fault it wasn't a good performance. He wasn't allowed to get a word in edgewise. And Trump just behaved like an absolute asshole the entire time. And his entire contingent, except for Melania, did not wear masks. They had agreed to wear masks. It was a requirement for the venue. They took them off as soon as they got in, except for Melania, which tells me she knew she was positive then too.
Now, someone on the internet said, oh, and I don't know if this was a liberal or a conservative, they said, I think that maybe Trump had planned this. Like this was part of the plan, that he was going to get sick, but he was going to get better. And then he would show that there's nothing to it. Plus, it would allow him to avoid the debates. And so it would actually put him in a better position politically, because he had went through it, he'd survived it. He didn't have to be in debates where they were going to turn his mic off so he couldn't interrupt Joe. And that it actually was a strategy. Do you give that any weight at all?
Well, when they initially said that Trump had COVID, I didn't know whether to believe it for exactly that reason, because they were planning that. And you're right, various people were discussing that as a possibility on Twitter 2 weeks ago. So this was something that they had been thinking about, pretending for him to get sick and then pretending for him to recover and say, oh, well, that's because he's Superman and he just has such good genes that of course he recovers. So yes, that was a possibility. When I first heard the news, it was, well, he could be faking it. But now there's so many other people who are positive as well. And I don't think the doctors at Walter Reed would cover for him like that. I don't think all the medical professionals are going to cover for him. Like once he's at the hospital, and people have said he was on supplementary oxygen, I don't think he's faking it. At this point, I think he really is sick. And I think half his administration is sick as well. So I think this is going to be a huge problem. But I can absolutely see why people thought he was faking it. I mean, he lies about absolutely everything, and he had been planning to lie about exactly this. So of course people jumped to that conclusion. But this time I think he actually is sick.
Well, I was going to throw you one last question about this before we wrap up for today. And I was going to say, what about this? The debates being in October when people are already voting by mail. Doesn't that seem just a tad late? I mean, what's the point in having debates, especially, you know, now there might not even be any more debates. And so it just seems ridiculous that, I mean, why weren't they in August or September? Why did it have to be October?
Well, I think in a normal year, it would be early enough. But this year is not normal. So this year we have the pandemic and everyone's trying to vote by mail, but even the people who aren't voting by mail are voting as early as they possibly can. So you've got everyone who possibly can voting as early as they can. And so in this case, yes, October is too late. They should have held those debates probably in August, I would think. But August is kind of the silly season, and I guess people don't want to do serious things in August, but at least they should have held it in early September. I think it's a real shame that it's really too close to really make much difference. But having said that, the debate that we had was a complete waste of everybody's time anyway. I mean, it was really, really terrible. But having watched it all, my impression was that he struck exactly the note that his supporters would have been expecting. They would have been expecting him to totally dominate Joe Biden. And that's exactly what he tried to do by not letting him speak, by insulting him all the time, trying to drag down the tone of the debate. That's exactly what his supporters were expecting. And I'm sure they were cheering from the rooftops over it. So he gave his supporters exactly what they wanted. Everyone else was horrified. But his supporters respect strength. And this is an interesting aspect with the COVID aspect as well. So his supporters think that illness is weakness, and they hate weakness more than anything. So it was always a dodgy strategy. If he was going to pretend he had COVID and then pretend to get better, just even pretending to get it might make people think, oh, maybe his genes aren't as good as we thought. Who knows? but now he's actually got it. This could be a problem because, well, for some of his supporters, they're going to just turn him into a martyr. For others, they might think, but he's weak, he's sick. Maybe he wasn't what we thought. So this could be another confounding factor, how it plays with the psychology of his base. I would have liked to see Joe be able to actually explain his positions, because he really didn't get a chance to do that. And I think that was a tremendous shame. It was a real waste of an hour and a half, that debate.
I turned it on live on the television, and I watched it for about 5 minutes because I got in just a little bit late, and I turned it off. And then I said, oh, I'll watch it the next day on the internet. And so I got it on the internet, and my 10-year-old and I watched like 5 minutes from right in the middle of it. But I mean, other than seeing Donald keep on interrupting and the moderator trying to say, you know, stop interrupting, there wasn't, I mean, that was it. I mean, that you didn't need to watch an hour and a half to understand that was what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, it was humiliating for Chris Wallace of Fox News, because he just completely lost control of that debate. It made him look like a fool. And it could be career ending for him, because, I mean, who's going to take him seriously as a journalist after that? No one will ever ask him to moderate a debate again. It was terrible, terrible performance from him. I mean, not that he could probably have done very much about it, but you know, they really need moderators who can deal with Trump. And cut his mic, absolutely cut his mic. They should have known he was going to do that, because that's what he always does. But they weren't prepared, and that's a shame.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nicole. And as always, we appreciate your insight from across the ocean. And if you appreciate this content on the internet, please thumbs up and put in a comment and like and subscribe and ring the bell. And we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.